Everybody, welcome back to the show. This is episode 72. Actually, we didn't do the intro, and we need to do the intro. So, Michael, go ahead and do the intro.
Crazy. Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I'm Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 72 of the North Meets South web podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for that little splash of intro music there, Michael. It's always a great pleasure to hear that. Then it's done.
That's all we need. It's too much,
That's
if you
it.
ask me.
I like it. It's good. It's good. So, hey, it is crazy. Like, just for, if there's my children ever listening to this someday because they want to hear what their old dad sounded like during the coronavirus days. Dude, it's like crazy what's going on, isn't it? I mean, like,
Yeah.
these are like unprecedented times. This is wild. It's like a global crisis, catastrophe. Everybody knows what you're talking about. And it's just
Yeah.
like that happens so rarely. So how's your family doing? You guys all doing well?
Yeah, we're okay for the most part. I mean, things have changed very quickly from, when we spoke last week to this week. I've, on Wednesday, started working from home full time. Ree is working home full time as of Friday. As of yesterday, my entire company shifted to 100% full time working from home. There's teething issues with that for a company that is predominantly office bound to now shift to working from home. There's challenges there, obviously, if people aren't used to it. The setups are different at home. Um, there's
Yeah, for
obviously the
sure.
social isolation aspect of it, which people need to adjust to. And you lose a whole lot of the social cues and things like that as well when you're moving to work from home. But I'm very fortunate that um, that I work for a company where that's actually something that we can do.
Yeah,
That
it's an option.
being a technology company, it was fairly easy for us to do that. But at the same time, there was we had some redundancies earlier in the week. There's been some changes from the top down. We've we've been asked to change our working arrangements and things like that for a little while. So I'm fortunate to still be employed. Obviously, that is first and foremost very important. Obviously, especially with the family,
Yeah.
to be able to keep doing that kind of stuff. To be employed and to be able to work from home and all that kind of stuff as well. So I'm very grateful for that. Eli's still in childcare at the moment. They haven't said they're closing schools and childcares and things like that. Yeah, we're obviously in two minds about that. We're as adults being told to socially distance ourselves and maintain non-essential travel, and we've South Australia's actually just today closed their borders, so that we're going to see very shortly from the federal government no more non-essential domestic travel. We've already closed our international borders, so and this is something that's happening around the world. So we're in two minds. Obviously, we're both working from home now, so we're kind of grateful that Eli's still being looked after. But um, you know, how long that's going to last, we don't know. And then once he's at
Right.
home, that's a whole different proposition for us because having a 21-month-old running around the house, it's not like you can just sit him down to watch TV for hours at a time. You got to keep keep an eye on him, and so we're just going to have to tag team and do that. So um, yeah, I've worked from home on occasion in the past. A day here and a day there, and if I've had to look after Eli, we've been able to have my parents around at least. But my parents, dad's 73, mum's 68, so we had to make the hard call of basically don't
Yeah.
come and
Yeah, to
visit
limit
us.
their exposure. Right, exactly.
Don't don't come and visit us for at least a couple of weeks just until we figure out what's going on. Um, so and the whole thing is you've got to spend a couple of weeks just to figure out if you do develop any symptoms
Right.
because the virus can just sit there and you can be asymptomatic for a period of time before you even know that you've got it because you've got no symptoms. So it's tough in terms of staying away from people, but we're living in a really good time where you and I can have this conversation, and this is fairly normal for us because we do this every week.
Right,
But
exactly.
you can pick up the phone and you can have a face to face video chat with someone, and it's good to see just on Twitter through the week people from all around Australia and all around the world offering up 5-10 minutes here and there throughout the day just to say, hey, want to have a chat? Do you want to, we could just have a little coffee break and things like that that you miss when you're not at work, that you don't, have that interaction. And sitting in a room by yourself can be daunting for some people, especially the more extroverted people. I think the introverts are probably cheering at the moment. This is what they've been
Right.
living for. They hate going into the office and being able to be at
Self
home.
quarantine. I've been
Yeah,
preparing for this for my whole life.
that's exactly right. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's funny.
we're making do. Some of the thought processes that I was going through earlier in the week was around, all right, assuming I don't have a job by the end of the week, how long can we survive and what do we do? But, thankfully it didn't
Yeah.
come to that. So, and
Unfortunately, I
I,
think a lot of people have had to sort of like run those scenarios, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh man, like, okay, if my employer goes bankrupt, I've got how much of a lifeline, or how long can I run? Like, what's my runway until I'm out of money or until I have to do something else?
yeah,
Yeah, it sucks, man. It's crazy. Like, it's just so like such a revelation that like security is an illusion. Like this idea of control that we have
yeah,
is so fragile, and like it's great. Like, and I don't know, like for us, my whole life, it's always been everything's just very stable. Like, yep, paychecks in the in the mail. Like, I'm getting one in next week, and like I'm gonna
mm,
get one 2 weeks after that, and then blah blah blah, whatever. Like, your bills are scheduled, everything's planned, no big deal, right? But like for people who have sort of lived longer, you can kind of see some of the some of the things that they've gone through, and it helps to explain maybe some of their tendencies or cautiousness around finances, around whatever it is, right?
mm,
Because they've seen stuff like this happen before. And for me, this is sort of like the first time. I mean, outside of like 9/11, 9/11 was a big deal, obviously, but it wasn't really. I mean, it wasn't even close to this scale.
no,
Um, and so, oh man, it's just very, very interesting. So, but it's like it feels like nobody is untouched. Like, even the people who have a lot of money are. I mean, obviously, people who have large investments, like the stock market is just tanking right now, right? So it's like everybody, doesn't matter rich, poor, whatever. Everybody's being affected. Like, the
yeah.
virus doesn't care how much money you have or whatever. So
Or how young you
it's
are,
just
or how fit you are, or how
exactly
old you are. It's,
right, right.
we've seen it with Rudy Gobert and, the immediate suspension of the NBA season as soon as a player tested positive, and all the sports leagues around the world are shutting down. AFL, our footy, they decided to go ahead with round one this weekend, and they'd shortened the games, and they had a whole heap of restrictions around, no high fives and things like that. But I get the feeling that the AFL season is going to get shut down very quickly. It was funny watching on Twitter last night all of the Americans, because we're basically the only sport in the world that's actually still going ahead at the
That's
moment. So
funny. So people are watching AFL.
yeah,
It's like, that's
so
hilarious.
it's different times. It's, adjustments and pulling back and just trying to be smart. And it's really hard to sit and watch and see all these people. Like, we had Bondi Beach was still open up until yesterday, and it was nice weather, so everyone went to the beach, and people aren't taking this seriously. And we're following the same trend in Australia that has been seen in Italy and the UK and the United States, where um, cases are still low in terms of population, but cases are doubling every 2 or 3 days at the moment. We went from
Yeah.
400 to 800, and we're at just over 1,000 now. Um, we had I think it was 4 cruise ships that docked in Sydney during the week, and those people were allowed to just get off the cruise ship. They weren't checked, they weren't tested, they didn't have their nothing. They just got off and went, and there
Yep.
were
Well, home. Yeah.
people went home, to the Northern Territory, and they've now tested positive to the virus. And we had 18 tourists, American tourists, yesterday. It was revealed that like 10 of the 18 had tested positive. So, and they're in South Australia now. That these people are just like, oh, I feel fine, and I feel fine is not the marker for this thing. It just sits there quietly, and it's the people that you pass it on to. And for all the medical advice that I've been reading is that for most people you'll be fine. For most people, if you get sick, you'll have the symptoms, and a week later or a week and a half later, the symptoms will pass, and you'll be okay. But it's not, it's not about how you feel and what's going to happen to you. It's about the people that you interact with. And if you're still going out and you're seeing people, and especially if you've got older parents and grandparents, it's just stay away from them for the time being. Don't, like, you wouldn't want to be the one that passes it on because you didn't know you had it, and then the worst happens, and the worst is happening. So be smart out there,
Yeah.
people. Be safe. A couple of weeks staying at home is not going to kill you. It's not like we're facing total lockdowns. It's just about minimizing contact with people outside of your own family. Um, I did our weekly grocery shopping yesterday. I went by myself. I went first thing in the morning. I spent as little time as possible in there. I didn't touch anything that I didn't need. It was just a matter of being sensible about being out, and getting the essentials for what's left. And for the most part, people are panic buying and hoarding stuff and things like that. It's madness. Like, people have bought up all the toilet paper and all the soap, which is fine, but what are you going to do when they shut everything down and you've got no food? Were you just going to eat toilet paper until you come out of lockdown? Like, and there's a website. I don't know if I'll find it and we can link it up in the show notes. How much toilet paper do you actually need? And based on how much toilet paper you've bought, how long is that going to last you? And
Right.
people
Yeah.
that are hoarding all this toilet paper have got like 3 months worth of toilet paper. Great. So, and because of those people, you go, well, there's no toilet paper, so if I see it, I need to buy it because there might not be any next time I go, kind of thing. And so it just
It's like this
perpetuates the
self-fulfilling
cycle.
prophecy. Yeah, this
Yeah.
recursive loop of people panic buying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So,
crazy.
the supermarkets here, I'm assuming it's the same over there. They've started putting limits on
Hmm.
per
Yeah.
transaction. You can only buy, I had to put some
Right.
milk back yesterday because I couldn't even buy the milk that we would regularly buy.
Right. Yeah.
Because, Ree's lactose intolerant, so she has her own milk, and then, Eli's got his own milk and I've got my own milk. So, you know, I put mine back because um you can only buy two items of cold milk, though I could still buy long life milk, ultra heat treated or whatever it is that you can keep in the cupboard for months at a time until you open it. So, um, yeah, it's weird. Like, people are not taking it seriously, but they're hoarding toilet paper for some reason. I don't know what their plan is, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
And
Wild
and you
times.
guys, you just got the governor of Illinois. I saw yesterday, the day before, has
Hmm.
instilled a shelter in place order.
Yeah, shelter in place. Yeah, yeah. So it actually is still like optional. I mean, technically, it's a recommendation. It's not actually going to be like enforced. Like, they're not going to be arresting people who are going
Mm.
to work or whatever. So it's kind of like up to the businesses. Our business is following it though, and we're trying to be really careful and making sure we're being responsible. So it's been wild. Like, our IT teams have been working like 20-hour days for the last like 4 days trying to get everybody remote. Because the thing is, we could order equipment to get people remote, but all the equipment's on back order.
Mm.
So they had to do magic to figure out how, instead of requiring all of our users to VPN in, they can do some fancy new trickery and update the firmware on these thin clients we have to allow people to just plug into their home network and at home and be able to get into our network at work through
Hmm.
HTTPS gateway. It's insane. Like, they've been doing some wild stuff.
Yeah.
I don't understand it, but they've literally been able to go from 30% ability of people to work remote to about 95% in 4 days.
Yeah.
That's unheard of. Like,
Yeah.
that, and the only thing they had to do was order uh, power over Ethernet injectors for the phones, for
For
some
the
of the
phones.
phones,
Yeah.
because people don't have PoE at home. So
Yeah. Of course.
that's I mean, it literally is like miraculous that they were able to do any of this stuff. So I'm like, I might be on IT support tomorrow, fielding phone calls from our new remote employees in case they have a setup connection
Yeah.
problem. So it's like, I'm just jumping in and do whatever I can help. Our dev teams are just, we're still chugging along, but I'm like, whatever I can do. Anybody who has a technical mindset, we're just kind of like, what can we do to help? Can we make Cat5 cables? Like, what can we do?
Yeah.
So we're
And
all just kind of jumping in and trying to help wherever we can.
it's amazing the turnaround that we've seen from all of these businesses that have suddenly, oh yeah, you can work from home because you have to. It's
Yeah.
And this is the point that DHH has been going on about on Twitter recently, amidst all of his tirade against the companies that aren't doing it and shutting down and things like that. How quickly businesses have actually been able to get their employees to work from home, for businesses that were not previously able to do it because you had to be in the office and you have to use our equipment. And suddenly, oh no, you can work from home, and we can make it happen. And seeing, it'll be interesting over the next few weeks as this all unfolds, how many meetings we'll find out that don't have to happen, that could have just been emails instead of our meetings with all these people in there. So
there's that old saying, like, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So like this, like, oh, well, you have to work remote now, so can we? It's like, well, I guess we can make it happen. So
yeah.
People are. Yeah, it's like, it's interesting, like all the innovation that comes out around these times of crisis where like you have to innovate. So like there's people making like 3D printed versions of ventilators. Like how quick can we scale up production of ventilators globally? Like America needs like 7.4 million of them. And it's like we have 700,000 of them. So like how do we get those, like all this crazy stuff that's going on. So yeah, it's a scary time, but I think that, I don't know. I don't want to make any predictions. I'm with you though. Like I'm thankful I'm able to work from home, and I'm hopeful that my employer is going to stay afloat. And that's definitely not true for everybody. So, hey, my prayers and thoughts are with you all, and we'll see you on the other side, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. So with that, like we've kind of had a little bit of extra time. Not really. But I've kind of been a little more. Just been like pushing a little bit harder on work stuff recently, and one of those items that we have been working on is Then Ping Me. So had some good stuff worked on with that this week, so we can talk about that a little bit, and then we can talk about some other stuff that I've been doing at work too, which has been good and interesting and sort of fun. But we can start with Then Ping Me if you want.
Yeah, let's start with Then Ping Me instead of leaving it as a straggler on the end of the show.
Yeah, so do you want to start or do you want me to start?
No, you've done all the work this week, so you can start.
Okay. So, we basically, the last spot we left off with, you and I, we had talked through all of the different discussions around what were the different statuses that we were going to be naming the things, and one of the ways that we have refactored that, and I have found to be very helpful, is to have these Enum classes. Now they're not, enums that you usually think database, but we have these Enum classes, and all of them are typically named something like, we have project statuses or task status or execution status or whatever we might have. And it's nice because those classes allow us to list out the names of those things. And as silly as some people might say it would be, it really is actually very helpful in an IDE to be able to have those things that pop up type hinted, and it eliminates magic strings completely. It's nice too because if I command click on that constant from anywhere in the code base, it'll show me all the other places that magic string, right, that constant is used. And so if I need to change that out, for example, like just the other day, I had one where we had actually put the statuses directly on the model itself. So like if you had task, and then under the task model, you had something like running status, pending status, whatever, as constants directly on the task itself. If I wanted to refactor that, all I had to do was command click on that constant inside that class, and it would show me all the other places it would used, and I would just go over there and replace all of those with whatever my new thing is. So I refactored it to a task status class. So that's one kind of pattern we've been using that I've found to be really, really helpful. So not only do we use it in classes, we also use it in tests and also in our model factories. So if we have different states that we want to use, so if we say, I want to create a task with a running status, or I want to create a task with a pending status, whatever, I'll use that as a state inside of my model factories. So I say factory, task class, state, task status, pending, create, whatever, right? So I've found that to be really, really helpful. So I saw you did a lot of that. I've done a little bit more of it, and that's been really good. So that's one of the pieces that we've done. Along with that, kind of the thought process came through about using state machines to handle the transitions between the different states that you have. The problem that I'm sort of having is that all of these really depend on each other. So it almost feels something like props down, events up
Mm-hmm.
is the idea, where the props down sort of thing is where you have to create something in order to create a child of that something. So for example, you have a task, and in order to create a ping, you have to create an execution. So you have a task, and then you have an execution, and then you have a ping, right? So a ping that belongs to that execution. So you have to kind of create that. But then as you travel kind of back up the chain, you say a ping of this type was created, and you trigger that event, and that event goes to the task, and the task then says, oh, I should be in a running status. And then the task running event fires. And now you have a execution started, or whatever, execution running event, and then that informs the task as to what it should do, and then the task informs the project as to what it should do. So you have kind of this cascade that really, it gets a little bit messy, right? And not really messy. There are solutions out there, but the solution that I was going to have to implement for that was basically going to have to rip out all the stuff that we had already built in there. And the thing was, like, we already had tests for all of that stuff. It was already working, and I'm like, okay, I started down that path, and it was working fine, but I was like, I really want to get this thing launched in a format that we can put out there for people to try by the end of this month. And I was like, okay, save all that work, put it over in a branch over here, go back to master, branch off as a keep it simple, stupid branch, like a KISS branch, just like, I'm going to keep this real basic. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And so I'm, instead of using the state machines sort of stuff right now, which we will do, I'm just writing the tests that are going to confirm exactly what I have already laid out in my brain about where the different transitions are going to be, and how that will affect things. So yeah, no, I'm really like happy with the progress, and the tests are giving me a ton of confidence that everything is working good. The tests are really solid. They feel great. So then the other thing that I did was I had a couple sort of determinations to make, which I will talk to you about, which were interesting discoveries to me. So that being said, here we go. So the question that I was kind of up against was, what sort of things, like how should a task influence the status of a project? So a project is the top level resource directly under a user. A user has many projects, or a user has a team which has many projects, either way. But it's a top level resource, you could think of it. And that project has a status, which is going to either be like this project is completely healthy, there's nothing wrong with any of the tasks that we're checking on, or you have it in a state of warning, right? Those are really the only two statuses we have for a project at this point, is healthy and warning. And so the question was, when a task, which is, there are three type of pings that can come in for a task, which is a started, a finished, or a skipped. When one of those comes in what way should that affect the status of the project? Okay, so when it starts, when a task starts, what sort of influence should that have on the project? Well, you may say, if it's starting, then we know that, okay, it's healthy, right? Well, obviously, you can't say that one task starting actually makes the entire project healthy. In fact, what you have to do is you sort of have to ask the project itself, hey, I started. Is everything good now? Like, can you mark yourself as healthy? Because that task doesn't have any knowledge of the other tasks. It's sibling tasks. It just knows what project it belongs to. But that also begs the question, does starting a task really tell you anything? And the answer really is not so much. No, it doesn't really tell you anything. All it tells you is that the task started on time, but it doesn't mean it finished successfully at all, right? So a task that has started can update the status of the task, but it doesn't affect the status of the project at all. So the task will be marked as running, and it will not get marked as late or missing, so that's fine. but it really doesn't have any effect on the project status at all, right? So a task starting event doesn't do anything for you. A task ending event, however, is different. At the point where you end a task, now you can say to the project, hey, now you need to check to see if this is actually good or not, right? So assuming everything's healthy, you're going to tell the project, hey, check yourself and make sure that everything's good. And if you are, then awesome. And that's really what you would typically see is you would say, if it's finished, mark everything is good, right? That's what you say, like, hey, I checked in, mark everything is healthy. The exceptions to that are if you have other tasks that are failing or missing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the issue. So you have to delegate the responsibility of the project knowing if it's healthy or not to the project, because the project is the only thing that's aware of all the tasks. So what I did is when a task is coming in with a finish ping, it says, hey, project, update health, update your health. And so the rule that I kind of came up with for that, and then let me talk about skipping real quick too. The other situation was when a task skips, when a task skips, does that mean it's healthy or not?
I think it's healthy. And we kind of talked about this a couple of episodes ago, I think, where a skip task is skipped because it has been explicitly told to skip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's the
and we've got an explicit event saying that I was skipped because I matched a condition that told me I don't need to run. So I don't think that
here's the
affects. I
only
don't think that
rub.
affects.
Here's the only rub. If I had a task that runs every minute, right? But it will only actually execute if there is a CSV in a particular spot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So we run it, and it actually goes to run. It doesn't do a skip event. It does a start, and then it fails. It doesn't ever check back in. The execution never finishes. It failed, right? The next event comes in and says skip. The CSV is no longer there. It got deleted. I'm not going to run it again. But the previous execution failed. If we say a skip is equal to healthy, that is completely buried now. You never know that failed task failed because the next skip came in and you're just like, yep, looks all good. Like so does a skipped event contribute to the health of a task, or does only a completed finished task change the status from failed to healthy or passing?
Well, I mean, a skipped event wouldn't ever change the status at all. It's as though it didn't happen, that it didn't start, so it never finished, which means it never failed. In terms of like if that CSV check failed or the the task is contingent, the task running is contingent on the presence of that CSV. I think that's beyond the scope of us, where all we're doing is monitoring whether or not the task ran or not. If there is some error condition that, if there is some condition within your application that leads to you erroneously determining that the task shouldn't be run, then perhaps that's something that you should be checking in your application. Maybe you should be logging that. Maybe you should be tracking.
Yeah, you would hope that. Yeah, you would hope that the error handlers that you have in place would catch that, and that something would tell you that that failed.
If your business rule is that there should be a CSV there once every 10 minutes, then if you don't see you should internally keep a incrementing counter or something that says, okay, I didn't see one for 11 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you raise an alarm in your application. We need to be very careful, I think, about what we know about specifics of our applications and how we treat business rules, because I don't think we need to cross that line into determining whether or not your application should have run a task. We just report based on what your application told us, and that it's skipped. and that it passed or it failed. I think if people are unsure, why is this, I'm expecting something to have happened and it hasn't happened, and then Ping Me didn't report it, then you would see, if you logged into the interface, that this task has been reporting skipped, for the last hour or the last 2 hours or whatever. Maybe later on down the track, we could consider putting in some thresholds or some alerts or something that, that we could do that if we receive 10 consecutive skipped events, then maybe we could raise an alert that says, hey, you've said this task shouldn't skip more than 5 times in a row, and it skipped 6 times. And then do something there. But I don't think that's something we need to necessarily consider now.
Yeah, I think my biggest question is,
we'll be trying to guess about, potential, imaginary users that don't exist yet, and what the needs of their applications are. I think we need to try and stick down the path of covering off the majority of cases as best we can without any real-time data.
Yeah, that's fair. I think my biggest question was, if we have a task that's marked as failed, and like that particular one, that's the only situation in which this makes sense, what I'm asking. If we had a task that's marked as failed, meaning it started but never finished, so we know something happened, an error occurred that allowed it to not finish reporting. If it's failed and we get a new skipped event, we just say, yeah, we're fine. We're okay with that. Like, we're just saying,
if we get a skipped event, we don't say anything. It's still failing until it's not failing, because something has made it go into a failing state.
Yeah. So what would happen is, like, so if we had an execution start, and then we have a check for failing executions, which would basically say, determine when we think this should be coming in at. Determine when we think this execution should finish, and if we never get that execution finished or task finished ping, then we will mark that task as failing at that point, right?
Yep.
That makes sense? Okay. So then if the task then comes in as a task skipped ping, we get a task skipped ping, we will record that we had a task skipped ping. But what you're saying is, and what I initially said was, if it's a skipped event after it's a failed event, it should not update the status of the task.
Well, by using a state machine model, would moving from failed to skipped not be an erroneous transition? Like, you can't go from failed to skipped. Would we prevent that from happening? Like, we would still record it, but you can't transition.
Yes, a task doesn't have a status of skipped. The task just has a status of passing, failed, missing, whatever. So an execution can be skipped, but a task doesn't have a status of skipped. So
no, but what I'm saying is, if the task is in a failing state, then it shouldn't be able to transition to skipped.
Yeah, I'm good with that. That's what that's the question that I'm having.
Yeah, that shouldn't affect the health of the task, I don't think.
Okay, yeah. So a skipped event doesn't have any effect on the health of a task.
Yeah, either positive or negative. So if it's healthy and you get a skipped event, it doesn't change to healthy, because it doesn't change. And if it's in a warning state, then skipped, I don't think, should alter the state of the task either.
Good. Okay, then we're on the same page, because that's where I was at with it too. So that's good. Okay, the other thing that I had then was a similar sort of idea, which is when the finalized, or when the let me just pull it up here. Project test. I believe it's my unit test. Yeah. Okay, so when we have a task that's finished, then what we want to do is we want to allow the project to update its own status to determine if it's healthy or if it's in a warning state still, the entire project, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we do with that is we say, hey, project, go ahead and update your health. So the project will check to say, hey, if everything that I have, if every task that I'm looking at is passing, go ahead and set it to healthy. Mm-hmm. Right? If I have any that are in a status of failed or missing, set it to warning.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a no op. So if it's running or it's pending, we say don't change the status yet. Don't change the status of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we would say that is because let's say that we have a task that's previously failing and it sets the status of the project to warning, right? Task that comes in, it's fails, and we set the project to warning.
Yeah.
So then a that task that was failing before comes in and is now set to be running, right? So that task that was just failed before is now running again.
Mm-hmm.
Now we don't actually know if it's going to pass successfully yet, right? So we're like just saying like maybe it's going to, maybe it's not, but it's now in this running status. Well, if we have another task that pings in at that time and says, "Hey, I'm good," the project looks at all of its tasks and says, "I have nothing in a failing state. I'm healthy." It's actually not.
Yeah.
It's actually not yet. So what we say is,
maybe we introduce a third state into the project. So you would have healthy, you'd have warning, and you would have recovering. That, that's a task that was failing, that is now passing or running, rather. It's now running. And so the project moves into a recovering state. I think the only thing that can take it out of a recovering state is the task that triggered that state in the first place. And that's getting a little bit trickier because that way you have to track what actually sent the project into the recovering state.
and so in this case, this actually still works. Like the way that I built it, it does still work because what's going to happen is that task that's running right now is in very short order either going to report back thumbs up, at which point it'll change the task, it'll change the project to healthy again, or it's not going to report, in which case it's warning again. So like just don't change it. That's what I'm saying. Like I don't really know that it's super helpful to change it from a warning to a recovery state in the time that it's running and then change it back to warning when it fails, or change it back to healthy when it recovers. Like I'm just kind of waiting. It's like, hey, if it was in a warning state and we have, everything looks good, but we have something that, we're not in a warning state yet, but not everything is passing. We have something that's running and we're kind of still waiting. Just hold on for a minute because it's probably going to finish in just a couple minutes here at the worst, and then we'll update you. But what that would prevent is it prevents this sort of like jank, this status jank, where you're going from like warning to healthy to warning to healthy to warning to like it's just triggering alerts that are not
especially if you're watching
helpful.
the UI for that as well. You just see it
Yeah.
bouncing between statuses. So something,
Yeah.
definitely something to be mindful of. The other thing, if you've got multiple servers and you've got tasks that should only run on one server, so you've got task 1, task 2, task 3, that'll do 3 tasks over here, and task 1 starts, and then the cron on the other server starts, and task 1 skips. So task 2 starts running